It's impossible to avoid them. For decades, we've been surrounded by sweet and fatty foods, and the body has not been dealing well with these eating habits. But what about the brain? Do our mental health, our moods, and our brain abilities suffer from the wrong kind of nutrition?
We know that junk food is making us fat, but science is telling us now that it might also be shrinking our brains.
Brain researchers have joined the dining table to study the effects of our eating habits.
Diets that are high in fat and sugar in the long term lead to changes in part of the brain involved in memory.
This is a recent field of research, a developing science that spotlights a new facet of nutrition.
Habitual intake of foods high in fat and sugar result in a reprogramming of the brain.
In short, our brain is affected by what's on our plates. It all starts with our very first meals, even before birth. The brain is built up during pregnancy. How it functions later on depends on how it has been nourished by the expectant mother's diet over 9 months. A number of consequences of poor nutrition during gestation have been known for a long time. Today, scientists in Australia are looking at the repercussions of nutrition on brain function. Felice Chaka, a professor at the University of Melbourne, examined the behavior of babies after following the eating habits of 23,000 pregnant women.
We measured their intake of junk and processed foods, we measured their intake of the healthful foods, foods with lots of fibre and nutrients, etc. And then we looked at the emotional health of their children over the first few years of life, from 18 months to 5 years. Of course, taking into account things such as education, income, the mother's mental health, parenting practices, these sorts of things. And what we saw very clearly was that mothers who ate more junk and processed foods, so sweet drinks and salty snacks and, cakes, biscuits during their pregnancy, their children had more of these behaviours such as aggression and anger and tantrums.
This disquieting correlation suggests that the mother's diet impacts the mental development of the baby, though the link remains to be demonstrated on the biological level. In any case, Felice Chaka is convinced.
So what we also saw in this large Norwegian study is that the children's diets seem to be important as well, independent of what mum ate. If children were eating too much junk and processed foods and or not enough of the healthful foods, they had more of these anger and aggressive type behaviours, but also sadness, anxiety, worry, nightmares.
Since then, Professor Chaka's conclusions have been confirmed by studies in Spain, the Netherlands, and Canada. Excess fat and sugar are now in the sights of scientists working on the brain. Excesses and deficiencies. Junk food is often low on essential nutrients, so it leaves the body, and especially the nerve cells, lacking. In this laboratory at the University of Bordeaux, scientists are studying the consequences of dietary deficiencies on mouse brains. This experiment is used to measure anxiety. The animal has the choice between exploring the lighted area or hiding in the shade. A normal mouse takes the time to examine the lighted area. But this animal was deprived of omega-3 fatty acids during its development. Omega-3s are called good fats due to their benefits to the heart and arteries. Instead of exploring the environment, the mouse takes refuge in a dark corner. It's stressed, anxious. The experiment has been reproduced many times on dozens of mice. For researchers, this strange behavior can be simply explained. Without omega-3 fatty acids, the brain does not develop and function normally. They're needed because the brain's gray matter is 90% fat, which it cannot produce itself.
The brain is the organ after adipose tissue that's the richest in polyunsaturated fatty acid, or omega-3. So omega-3 is indispensable because the body cannot make it. We have to ingest it. It has to come from the diet.
Oily fish, organ meat, vegetable oils, and seeds and nuts such as almonds have long been the main sources of omega-3 for humans. But these foods have become scarce in the cuisine of industrialized countries. The amount of omega-3 that enters the brain is crucial for making brain cells more efficient, because when these fatty acids are incorporated into the membranes of nerve cells, they improve their electrical properties. In omega-3 rich neurons, the signals propagate faster. The network is more efficient. Depriving the brain of omega-3 is linked to a risk that it will function less well.
The general population is deficient in omega-3. We have insufficient intake of omega-3, so it's important to pay attention to it, especially in the prenatal developmental period. During this period, omega-3 embeds itself in massive quantities into the brain. Also in adolescence, when there's often a change of food, and during aging, where the incorporation into the brain of omega-3 tends to be less effective, so we must increase its intake.
The first rule for a brain to run at full speed is avoid deficiencies. But good nutrients and a varied diet should be available. What happens to neurons when meals are poor and, above all, always the same? That is a problem that is now affecting the wild-living European hamster, which thrived for a long time in the plains of France's Alsace region.
Since the 1960s, there's been a decline in the hamster population, which is on the verge of extinction today. And at the same time, we've noticed an increase in the agricultural area where corn is cultivated.
Caroline Abold wondered whether the collapse of the population was linked to the sudden glut of corn. So she did an experiment, feeding hamsters exclusively corn.
During breeding, we observed behavioral disturbances in females, which resulted in hyperaggression and hypersensitivity as soon as there was noise in the room. Above all, what we did not expect is that these females would devour their young the first day after birth. This behavior was observed in more than 80% of females.
A dietary deficiency was enough to make a hamster devour its children. The cause? A simple vitamin.
A vitamin B3 deficiency is at the origin of the abnormal behavior. When we supplemented them with vitamin B3 in addition to their corn-based diet, they expressed quite normal behaviors. And they began to nurse their young, to raise them in the same way as the females that were fed a diversified diet.
The case of the cannibalistic hamsters is disturbing. Could an unbalanced diet also trigger aggressive, violent behavior in humans? Ab Zaalberg is a clinical psychologist and political advisor to the Dutch Ministry of Justice. His specialty? Nutrition and crime. He's convinced that enriching food with vitamins, fatty acids, and minerals can reduce aggression. It's a hypothesis that is difficult to test in normal life because so many factors and circumstances can influence our behavior and our impulses. In order to study nutrition without the influence of the many parameters, he chose prisons as a nearly ideal setting.
Here, in the Netherlands, we conducted a study of young prisoners in 8 different prisons. For 3 months, we gave them vitamins, minerals, and fatty acid supplements. And then we looked at the effect on their behavior. We measured it in 2 different ways. First, we asked the detainees how aggressive they were, and we asked the supervisors for their views on the issue. Above all, we looked at the incident log, the number of times detainees were punished, and we saw that solitary confinement had fallen dramatically.
In the group of inmates whose meals were improved, the number of incidents was reduced by 1/3. What we eat may have the power to change our moods, to stimulate certain impulses. But could the food on our plate also influence our decisions? The ones we believe we make using our free will.
When people are asked if they think that the food that they eat has an impact on health, most answer yes. But when asked if diet can also influence thoughts and decisions, very few people are willing to believe this is the case.
Das können sich viele Leute nicht vorstellen.
However, at the Institute of Psychology of the University of Lübeck in Germany, Professor So-Young Park has, for the first time, proven it. Her work reveals the mechanism by which food could influence our thoughts. And for that, the researcher has developed a rather original experiment. Imagine that you face the following dilemma. The money on the table is to be divided into 2 sums. But it's your partner, a stranger, who decides how it is to be distributed.
I give you €2 and I keep 8 for me.
If you accept the unfair offer, you leave with a little money, but much less than your partner's. If you refuse, no one wins anything. So what would you do? Do you accept the offer and take the €2 even if you feel cheated? Or do you refuse and leave with empty pockets, but your head held high? Well, it turns out, surprisingly, that whether you'll take the money or not depends on what you've just eaten.
As part of this study, we followed 24 people who came into the laboratory twice to have 2 different breakfasts. We found that the same person made completely different decisions based on what they ate in the morning.
To the test person, the 2 breakfasts look the same. In reality, one is far more protein-rich than the other. The ratio of protein to sugar is the only parameter that changes. A few hours after the meal, the subject takes several tests on a computer. Today, he accepts the offer. His self-interest outweighs his anger at the unfairness, and he will leave with a little money in his pocket. Last week, he mainly refused and won almost nothing.
The subject, having consumed a high-protein breakfast in the morning, was tolerant of unfair offers. Conversely, the subject who consumed a high-carbohydrate breakfast was less tolerant in the face of unfair offers.